Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks, another presentation of nonlinear existentialism. The question is, what is philosophy? Subtitle of this one is Define the Process and Contextualize the Output. That'll be explained towards the end, at the end of the presentation. So, the gist of this was when I did the separation and integration that presently is on the website charitiesoflife.com, and at the end of it in summary, it comes to one of the prepositions was that I came to the idea that philosophy was basically was just abstraction. I agree with that. However, I don't think it explained it properly. In a way, if you use car as an example, a metaphor, that an engine, the components, and the physical components for the vehicle, when in use, give an experience to the person driving it. But if we only concentrate on the experience of the person driving it without understanding the mechanics and the interplay of the components, you can't really understand why this occurred. So in this context, that I'm going to come up with an idea of what about nonlinear existentialism can lead to philosophy. So nonlinear existentialism is actually the physicality of it, and the output of that physicality in the nervous system. One of them can possibly be philosophy, and that's what's going to be brought up. So we have basically five parts to this. Review of nonlinear existentialism, questions, what is considered to be philosophy, the ad hoc nonlinear existentialistic definition of philosophy, conclusion, and questions. So, the key aspect of nonlinear existentialism is the idea of nonlinear. So we have external energy patterns that are transformed into internal energy patterns, which be actually non-neuronal internal energy patterns. If the external pattern can predict the internal pattern, then it would be linear, like in a robot. However, with the incongruency and interference that's caused by frequency and amplitude modulation, which is not going to be linear with the input, you have nonlinearity being produced. So, and that is true because of the instability that's produced by these modulation. You have a possibility of pattern change, or neuronal pattern change, which can be incremental and can also be additive. The increments themselves are going to be very minor. However, the more a more interference, incongruency occurs upon the original pattern, that there's going to be more abstraction. And again, the idea of how abstraction might be a good term for something which is philosophical. Then there's also the question about what makes something philosophical. Is it the subject that's being considered, the person is considering, or both? And lastly, what does define the process and contextualize the output mean? And that'll be towards the end that I'll be discussing. So firstly, what is philosophy? Do we have some present understanding of it? And certainly we do. It is considered the study of fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. I got this from an online Oxford dictionary. And then there's the question of, is it that which has led to the creation of specialized sciences? Certainly it has. One good example is for the human body in medicine. Originally, they thought it was just the four humors, and through millennium, it turned into a specialized medicines that understand things greatly. And I believe that this is one of the results of philosophy, is considering the unknown and trying to come up with the known. Then there's it's a circular argument, but you can state what philosophers do or should be able to do. So a philosopher philosophizes, but I don't think that's too helpful. So we'll begin here. The ad hoc, nonlinear existential definition of philosophy. So it could be said that the study of philosophical thought of a person or groups of persons is philosophy. Then there's a question of what is a philosophical thought. And this is where we get into the heart of nonlinear existentialism, which is biological explanation of what we are and how it can express things that are considered abstract in the case of philosophical thought. So that which occurs when a sentient being experiences elevated levels of neuronal incongruency and subsequent neuronal instability, when considering differences between quality and quantity and the possible ways to resolve, manage them. And then what's important with here to understand what quality and quantity is, quality is going to be an internal standard to the individual, and quantity is an external standard. And many times these two do not agree, and that can lead to elevated amounts of neuronal instability and possible changes in neuronal patterns to the good or to the bad. So the 5 key aspects to this ad hoc definition is first, sentient being, and sentient being within the realm of nonlinear existentialism is that which is separated from the environment, and the separation occurs because of the amount of incongruency through nonlinear input internal to the individual. Then we have elevated levels of neuronal incongruency, and that comes from in this case specifically, layer V1b of the telencephalon, which is one of the layers produces electromagnetic pulse, and it causes other neurons around it to grow towards it, and this causes the input signal to separate, combine, and to basically be incongruent with itself. Then we also have considering differences between quality and quantity, and I'll show the definition very quickly of what quality and quantity is, more so than I just mentioned. And then finally, possible ways to resolve, manage them. And these are going to be the philosophical systems, that they're aware that there is going to be some incongruency between quality and quantity. And then the philosopher, through elevated levels of neuronal incongruency, tries to resolve, manage that which is in conflict. So as proposition 4 of separation integration is, quantity is external of the environment, a non-changing, stable standard that is used by an observer to measure objects, ideas against. So this is a relative term, that's why it's in red, is that quantity in comparison to quality is relatively stable. And then vice versa, quality, the standard of quality, is changeable in comparison to the more stable one in the environment. In quality, internal of object, changeable, unstable standard that is used by an observer to measure objects, ideas against. So you have what's within the individual and what's external to. And then we got a bit more detail here. The gist of it is that differential perception is necessary to be able to interact in the environment. If everything is perceived by the individual to be the same, the individual cannot function. And a referential knowledge is basically things that are transformed external into internal, and then they're compared to each other. Like they may not be exactly what's external to, but if everything gets changed into or transformed into the internal environment, then they can be compared to each other, and then through that comparison contrast, knowledge can be produced. So taking the concepts of quantity and quality and differential perception and referential knowledge, the ones in red I think are going to be the ones that are going to be most likely to cause the highest amount of conflict. Referential is always be the thing is contrasting things against themselves. So through contrasting quantity referential knowledge and quality referential knowledge, the internal belief of truth and the external truth that is seen can cause a problem. For those who have a philosophical bent, they're going to have more of a propensity towards probably considering it more, having more additive increments of nonlinearity in their internal environment. So their quality is possibly going to be more divorced from the quantity. And through that, there can be issues, of course, because you can get so abstract that the output of the philosophical argument can actually be contradictory and also absurd. So in conclusion, to understand philosophy, it is best to define the process and contextualize the output. So define the process, meaning the neurophysiological processes as offered by nonlinear existentialistic theory. Talks about basically how the signal coming into the mind can be transformed and altered. So in increments, additive increments. So this instability, incongruency, instability is produced and possibly leads to the formation of more successful pairings or groupings of patterns where it leads to a better outcome for the individual and possibly gives a better explanation for the differences between quality and quantity. And I think that's necessary to understand in a contextual way. You have to put it in context. You have to have the context of the type of individual and their ability to produce nonlinearity naturally, and also perhaps in the patterns that are formed within them through their history, through the evolution of the individual themselves. They might actually have stored patterns that are highly volatile. And so the thing is that might lead to more of a concern. So you've got, by nature, some individuals are going to have more volatility, more instability than others just by nature. And also these same individuals might have groupings of neuronal patterns that are highly unstable due to their upbringing. So the thing is that if both processes happen at the same time, and we consider someone like Richard Nietzsche in this context, is that that might have left him to so abstract a way that maybe it was difficult for him to bring it back to a defined process. I don't know, most philosophers seem to stray away from discussing or considering the biological matrix upon which the thoughts and such, I believe, are firmly linked to. For some of them, it appears that the biological matrix is kind of an afterthought. But again, with the car argument, it's almost impossible to understand a car unless you understand the mechanics of the car. Philosophy is extremely important, but the thing is it has to be rooted. Because if it isn't rooted in the basic cement of its reality, of those materials, then you start coming up with some strange ideas of what philosophy is. That if we're going into the unknown, and I believe that's what philosophy is, you have to link it to something that you know. And the thing is that's a huge problem. I think they jump directly into concepts and ideas without any linking to something that we know something about. So I think that's something to consider. I think that's a better explanation just saying that philosophy is abstract. I'm trying to explain why it is abstract and why it's important to understand the biological process and also that which it possibly can produce. And namely, it's because of the conflict between external and internal standards, quality and quantity, and how it can be resolved and how sometimes it doesn't get resolved. So I thank you very much for your time. You can check the Separation, Integration, Introduction to Nonlinear Existentialism. It's in the summary section of the website www.charitiesoflife.com. And always look forward to any questions. And I thank you very much for your time.